Hello and welcome to the Weatherization Assistance Program Mold and Moisture Education, presented by the Building Performance Center in Bellingham, Washington. My name is Jake Knuckles. I'm one of the trainers here at the Building Performance Center, and we are going to spend the next several minutes talking about mold, moisture, education, how to inspect it inside of a home, how to pay attention to the needs of a home, how to protect the clients, how to protect your contractors or your crew, and how to better understand the necessary risks regarding mold and moisture inside of a home. Within the weatherization programs, mold education is required. There are 3 policies or program notices surrounding mold education. The first, WPN 05-01, it states that mold training is required. Weatherization crews will receive specialized training to recognize the conditions that promote mold growth and how best to prevent it. Weatherization Program Notice 17-7 reiterated the requirement of mold training and added that OSHA, their Mold in the Workforce pamphlet, is the guide for crews out on the work site. Most of the information covered during this program comes from the OSHA Mold in the Workforce document. Lastly, policy 9.1.1, that's a Department of Commerce policy, indicates mold training, that the local agency shall provide training in the mold inspection and documentation protocols established by the Department of Energy for all staff charged with assessing projects for weatherization. Now, one of the largest questions that comes up is in regards to mold and our individual weatherization programs, what are we able to do? Well, DOE does not allow for cleaning up a mold issue in a home. It is not an approved measure to complete on a home. It is easy to assume that when we climb up into an attic and there's a fan that's been venting into an attic, we have mold growing off the top of the roof deck, that our job is to remove that mold. We would like to do so, but we can't. It is a disallowed cost. Now, when it comes to state funding, the answer is maybe. State grants allow us a little bit more flexibility. Specifically, matchmaker funding allows a little bit of cleaning. But I stress the minimum, a minimal amount of cleaning. Plus health dollars, they allow for a lot more flexibility in what we do with mold in homes. There's a specific measure for mold remediation. We just have to keep in mind that there are financial limits that apply. One of the things that is never allowed across any of the different funding programs is mold testing. Just no. Just no. Don't even bother with it. Now, let's talk about some myths. Let's talk about some widely held beliefs regarding mold that are not true. First, myth number 1, your house can and should be completely free of mold. No mold in your house. You should never see any. Well, the problem is that mold spores are a part of the natural environment, inside and out. They're impossible to remove all of them. It becomes an issue when those levels are unhealthy. So getting rid of mold completely from a home is never going to happen. Number 2, that mold is harmless. Well, that's a myth. We know that. The health effects in specific are unclear, but it really depends on the person. It depends on the immune system, the age, the exposure. These are all things that we know. Mold is not harmless. Myth number 3, black mold and toxic mold are very dangerous. Well, these are labels that we put to certain types of molds, but most black mold is very dark green, actually. And only some mold spores, only specific types of mold spores, produce toxins. Stachybotrys can be associated with adverse health effects and even death. And that's the main one that we talk about the main type of mold that we reference when we are communicating black mold, or when someone from any of our houses that we are weatherizing says black mold. That's the mold that they're talking about. Myth number 4, once you've killed mold, the removal is optional. You can just leave it there. The problem is that allergens are still present in the home, and they can still become airborne if the mold is dead. Even if the mold is dead, mold should be remediated. Once you've killed mold, you need to get rid of the mold. It's not good enough to just say that you have killed it and then ignore it. Number 5, bleach kills mold. That's one that we would love to be true, right? Right. But it's not completely true. Bleach can kill mold on non-porous surfaces. Its effectiveness on porous surfaces is unclear. Windows made of glass are a non-porous surface. They are easy to clean. When we are talking about wood or sheetrock, those are very porous surfaces and make for a very difficult cleaning time, and we don't know how far that mold has sunk into the framing. Myth number 6, mold remediation is something you can handle yourself. Well, small areas, yes. But pervasive problems, extensive problems in a home, and professional help is recommended. How about myth number 7? A small amount of mold generally doesn't indicate a problem. This feels a little bit like the Titanic and the iceberg. They saw the iceberg, but they couldn't see everything else that was underneath it. It's the proverbial tip of the iceberg. You see a little bit of mold, and it can indicate a much larger problem that is generally unseen. So we need to treat even a small amount of mold like there could be a larger issue in the home. Let's talk about some basic steps and actions associated with the work we do. Now we start with our DOE Program Notice 17.7, which reiterates the need for mold education. We move on to our assessment. Our audit includes a mold assessment and a pollution source survey. We take a look at what we see in the home. We use our eyes to determine what we see in the home, keeping in mind all of the education that we have been provided or will be provided. Next, we provide notification. We provide a disclaimer to the client what we saw in the home. We want them to know. Also, we want to make sure that they know that we are not an expert, that we have education, that we are able to diagnose certain situations, but that we are not the experts on mold. And therefore, we cannot speak about things that we do not know every facet of. Once we have notified the client of the mold content in the home, the results of our mold assessment, Washington State Protocol determines what action comes next. If the problem is extensive, the client may need to be referred to another program for cleanup, or deferred perhaps. Or, if no cleanup is needed, then we just regularly proceed with work. If minor cleanup can be done while doing repairs, then we can also proceed with work. We will have to keep these things in mind. A project can also develop into an issue, in which case you need to communicate with your program manager before proceeding down that road. In regards to our training goals, for the next several slides, we're going to be providing education. We want to make sure that you walk away from this training with very specific results. In this case, we want you to learn what DOE requires regarding mold-related weatherization, some building science related to molds, recognition of conditions that promote molds, some best weatherization practices to prevent molds, client disclosure of molds, and lastly, how to treat less extensive mold conditions, those that we are able to address. Why are molds a concern? While dormant, mold spores are always present inside a home. We've already talked about that. That was myth number 1. Active mold growth indoors is not normal. That's growth on the walls, growth above the shower, on the floors, things like that. Those are not normal growths. molds can present health risks for crews and clients. Uncontrolled mold growth can cause severe and permanent structure problems, can start rotting out material. Failure to recognize conditions of mold growth can worsen existing mold cases, or, in some cases, cause molds to actively grow. Mold is a byproduct of a moisture issue. Now, where mold problems may be found in a home. Here's a lovely diagram of different places that can be problem issues for mold to be growing. Dirty air conditioners, dirty humidifiers, an unventilated attic, carpet on a damp basement floor, bedding, a closet on an outside wall. There's a whole host of areas where mold can be found in a home. Now, molds in mobile homes is a unique situation. We see a lot of mobile homes and they have their own set of issues, right? Mobile homes are constructed differently than regular homes. There's different materials that are used in the creation of these, much more sources of processed wood, which is mold food. There's many cold surfaces for condensation, single pane windows, louvered windows. It tends to be a smaller volume, so less dilution of that regular humidity, that relative humidity inside of the home. As far as the roof space goes, there's no ventilation, or in most of these homes, the ventilation is poorly distributed throughout the home. The crawl space, similar thing. We've got tight skirting. We've got plastic skirting. We've got poorly ventilated skirting. We have plumbing leaks often underneath homes. Dryer venting underneath homes. Mobile homes are a very curious and complicated home to investigate for mold. There are a lot more options for mold in a mobile home. Why do we care about mold today? Why more today than, say, in the last 15 years? Well, because we're more aware. We're watching the news. We're reading articles online, we're following people on Instagram that have education in molds. We are following people on Instagram or social media who believe that they have more information about mold than they really do. All of that adds up to a greater awareness of mold. Also, today, in today's world, there are better building practices, excessive building tightness in a home. We are building homes better and tighter with reduced infiltration and, whoops, sometimes with reduced ventilation, and that does become an issue. Why are we concerned with it today? Because, again, there are always outside background levels of mold. We also know that there are potentially poor construction practices where the contractor jumps in and out of a project, maybe cuts corners. Who is actually doing this work? Is it the homeowner who is trying his best to pull it off? Is it the homeowner who's trying her best to make her home as energy efficient as possible? What about the improper use of building materials? That's a concern. If they're not using the right product for the right use, we could have a mold or moisture concern. And then lastly, like we were already covering, there's more media and much more public awareness about mold and mold concerns. When we're talking about mold and moisture, what are we talking about? We're talking about fungi, naturally occurring organisms that are essential to decay of organic matter. We're talking about mold and mildew. These are terms used to describe fungi. Well, what about biologicals? Yes, water source, indoor air quality problems like fungi in a home. Bioaerosols, these are biological aerosols like airborne droplets containing mold spores, bacteria, really small volatile organic compounds or VOCs. We're also talking about mycotoxins. These are the most potent carcinogens. These are things that are produced by these molds and by other fungi. Aspergillus, Penicillium, and Stachybotrys. That's the one that we were talking about earlier. That's the, quote, black mold that we have to be concerned with. These are long known as agricultural threats even to livestock and humans from animal feed and grain dust. In regards to mold growth, it releases tiny spores, and those spores travel in the air and they settle on surfaces and they get into water. They can multiply in the right conditions. Problems occur when these colonies or spore levels are large. Active mold growth indoors, again, is not normal and can present health risks to crews and clients. Under the right conditions, mold can grow anywhere. There are many health effects that people react to. Spores, concentrations of spores, fragments, proteins, mycotoxins, microbial VOCs. People can react if mold is living or dead. Mold must be dealt with before weatherization or be an active part of the plan for weatherization services on a home. Let's talk some more about some health concerns. It is generally accepted within the community that the response to mold varies. It affects people differently, whether you are young, whether you are old, whether you have existing respiratory concerns, whether you don't, whether you smoke, whether you don't. Young children and the elderly are more susceptible to mold effects, especially those with compromised immune systems. The cumulative effect of living with mold is real. Issues can be greater with long-term exposure. For crews and clients, the symptoms related to mold exposure that we should be aware of when we walk into a home and find that there is mold in a home, when we diagnose that there is a mold issue during our assessment, when our crews are on site and someone reacts in a certain way. These are some things, some symptoms that we need to be aware of related to mold exposure. Nasal and sinus congestion, sore throat or coughing, shortness of breath, chest tightness, eye irritation, headache, fatigue, rashes. Mold is known as an asthma trigger. If you experience multiple of these symptoms while you are on site, whether the client is experiencing them, whether our crews are experiencing them while on site, we should either recommend, or if it's some of our crew or crew members, we should make sure that someone is seen by a medical professional. Again, this goes back to being careful of what we say or recommend to a client. We are not an expert. We can make our recommendations based on our education. If we find a client who is living in a home that is overrun by mold and has some of these symptoms, we can suggest to them that they see a medical professional. We can note that they have a mold and moisture concern for their home, but we need to fall back on that we are not an expert. We make recommendations, we do not make diagnoses. Now, here's the time for some questions. You can, if you would like to, I will read a question. You can feel free to pause, and then we will talk about the answers to some of these questions. So the first question is, what are some health symptoms of mold exposure? Some health symptoms of mold exposure may be congestion, sore throat, cough, headache, fatigue, rash, and eye irritation. We covered that just a minute ago. Question number 2, what are some characteristics of mobile homes that makes them more susceptible to mold growth? Inferior materials, bad ventilation, small volume. These are some characteristics of mobile homes. Number 3, how does mold growth relate to weatherization? Well, mold growth relates to weatherization because we're tightening up homes during the course of our work. We're addressing ventilation. We are affecting homes, and thus we are affecting clients. The work that we do is important work, but during the course of that work, we are looking at the entire home. We are getting our eyes on a potential mold issue. We are then providing a work scope for our crews to follow that may, without proper precautions taken, cause more mold to grow in the home. These are things we must be aware of. All right, let's jump into our next section. Let's talk about some conditions that promote mold growth within a home. There are 9, count them, 9 conditions of mold growth. One, mold spores being present already. Two, food, active organic materials that mold can eat. Moisture, building tightness, temperature, oxygen range, time, an improper weatherization assessment, including diagnostics or proposed measures, and lastly, lack of home occupant knowledge and maintenance. Let's start with number one, mold spores present. Now, we know from before that there are mold spores everywhere, inside and outside. Fungi technically consists of approximately 25% of Earth's biomass. That is a lot, and it's everywhere. There are lots of species. Estimated fungi species exceed 1.5 million. They also survive. Dormant spores can survive for many years without germinating or spreading. The bottom line is that fungi spores will be in the homes you audit and weatherize. Period. Myth number one, busted. It's everywhere. Secondly, for mold growth, we need organic material. We need a nutrient source. Molds secrete digestive fluids that decompose material, like substrate, and make nutrients available. So processed wood or cellulose, sheetrock, insulation paper, most everything used in construction can be a nutrient source. What about natural fibers, carpet, rugs, and upholstery? Many furnishings and finish material can be food for mold. Dirty water. We've all been in those crawl spaces. The gray water is full of organic materials. Gray water from sewage can lead anything it touches into being a mold farm. Well, what about inorganic materials? Well, mold can't get nutrients from inorganic materials. We're talking metal, we're talking about glass. These things won't supply nutrients. However, mold can grow on any of the dust or soil that is present on these surfaces. So when somebody says, I've got mold on my windows, well, mold isn't growing on the glass, but dust, dirt particles, various things have settled on that window and provided a hospitable place for mold to grow. Number three, moisture. Moisture is conducive to mold growth. Controlling that moisture is the key, especially to the work that we do. There are two main sources of moisture: water intrusion and humidity, or excessive humidity, that we'll talk about here. If you control the moisture, you can control the mold. In regards to water intrusion, well, where does that water come from? There's water from plumbing leaks, sewage backup and flooding, foundational seepage from lawn watering, snow, rain runoff, poor drainage around the home, lack of gutters, lack of downspouts. There's also capillary movement, wicking into organic materials. We've seen that when we're crawling around in crawl spaces and you see that staining going up the 4x4s, the pylons, the various things that are holding up the substructure of the home. But dirty water is definitely the worst. Dirty water stuck in a crawl space. Water intrusion can be as simple as overspray from a shower that's simply not managed. How often we get out of the shower and there's a big puddle of water on the floor. Hopefully we're not leaving it. Let's focus on two areas in a home that we typically find this type of water intrusion. First, the ceiling. If the ceiling is wet, there's a problem. If the ceiling is moldy, it's already been a problem. So we can check for moisture from these sources regarding our ceiling mold problem. Ice damming. Maybe we have an issue with warm air getting up into the attic space, melting the snow, refreezing, causing this ice dam on the outside of a home that's just going to end up being a mold issue in the future as that ice melts. What about insulation drift? You've got areas where there isn't any insulation. No insulation at all in certain areas, or even some of those attics where it's completely devoid of insulation from the very get-go. Improper attic or exhaust venting. Maybe the attic space itself has no roof vents, has no soffit vents. The attic plane, the ceiling plane itself is allowing a lot of moisture to come up through the home. We're talking about ventilation fans in bathrooms. that are not actually venting to outside. Some genius just popped a fan in the ceiling and let it blow into the attic space, all the moisture from every shower. Roof leaks, air conditioner condensation. There's probably a million other different ideas where we could find out where that ceiling mold is coming from various sources. Let's talk about mold in basements. One of the most common places for mold in a home is the basement. You go down into any basement that I've ever been into, and you do have that kind of musty odor down in the crawl space. Well, why? Well, typically basements are cold. They're colder, they're not heated well, there's lots of cold surfaces. They are butting up against the ground on the outside. So you have these cold surfaces, you have the potential for exterior water to find its way in, small cracks, small crevices, little tiny areas where that moisture can come in and then stay. One thing that we need to make sure that as we're weatherizing, we don't insulate or cover any issue until that problem is dealt with. If we don't solve the moisture issue and we cover it up, we can cause a much bigger problem later. Let's talk about excessive humidity. Now, high humidity plus colder surfaces, your basement, maybe an underheated home, that equals condensation. Anytime high humidity contacts colder surfaces, condensation can occur. Lower R values, walls, ceiling, floors, knee walls, etc., create colder surfaces, and that's where we have an issue. That reiterates the importance to adding proper insulation to a home, in addition to some of these health and safety measures. How about high humidity and poor or no ventilation? Well, now you're asking for a mold breeding ground. We're talking about those homes where there are maybe many people in the home. Maybe they cook a lot during the daytime, and there's just no ventilation to get that out. Or they've got a recirculating kitchen fan that is under the mistaken understanding that it is ventilating the home, when it is really not. It's just shoving that moisture back into the air inside the home. If we have high humidity and poor to no ventilation, we're going to have major mold issues in the home. Moisture itself flows like everything else, like thermodynamics 101. Warm to cold, hot to cold, more to less, high pressure to low, more water content to a place of less water content. That is just how it works. Let's talk about some common sources of moisture in the home. Some we could all list out: showers, clothes dryers, combustion devices, whether your water heater or your parlor stove or even your oven. Cooking dinner, even a family of 4, even a family of 2 or 1. Anything that is boiled on a stove top, anything that is cooking, something that is giving off moisture, that goes up and into the air. Mopping the floor, respiration between the occupants of the home, or even pets perhaps. New construction materials that are off-gassing some of the moisture that's in the materials. Vapor barriers underneath houses. Let's talk for just a minute about the content of moisture in a couple of these things, just for context. When we are talking about a shower, we are talking about roughly 1 pint of water that exists in a 10-minute shower that is being given off into the air typically. 10-minute shower right here. Now, if I was to sit in a classroom and someone was to ask me whether more moisture was given off from a shower or from drying clothes, I would probably say the shower, because it's more noticeable. You can see it on the windows, you can see moisture on the walls even afterwards. But if we're talking about a clothes dryer in a home, remember for context, 1 pint of water out of a shower. But with drying clothes, we're talking about significantly more than that. And you can see that this could be an issue in homes where that dryer is not vented to outside. When the dryer is not vented to outside, the amount of moisture that comes into a home is remarkable. 5 pints of water come into a home from an unvented dryer. 1 pint for a shower, 5 pints for an unvented dryer. That's pretty remarkable. Hence, we can see why there are things that we address during weatherization that reduce moisture content in a home, reduce the chance for active mold growth in a home, and why the work that we do is so important. So for the state of Washington, the optimum level is between 40 and 50%. Colder months, where you have the potential for more moisture inside the home, may require lowering the level to 35% relative humidity to prevent condensation. We know what it's like to walk into those homes that feel like a sauna, not from heat, but simply from the moisture content in the home. Let's move on to building tightness. So building tightness, today homes are built tight. They're intended to be built tight in order to maximize energy efficiency. The problem is when we do not control the ventilation within that home. If we spend all of our time worrying about energy efficiency and bypass all the concepts of health and safety and ventilation for that home, we are going to cause issues. A tighter house means less air exchange. A tighter house means less moisture evaporation. A tighter house means less pollutant dilution. A tighter house, in the end, means a greater chance for mold growth. And here is where we ask the question, well, how tight is too tight? We want our homes to be as tight as possible. We want the insulation to do everything that it's supposed to and more. We want the heating inside the home not to cost us very much. A tighter house is a more efficient house, but you can end up with a house that is too tight without the proper ventilation. We have to follow the ASHRAE standards and ASHRAE compliance. That is required for the work that we do through weatherization. The science exists to hopefully create an environment that will not turn harmful. Therefore, we use our blower door diagnostics. We set up the blower door, we run the tests, we take a look at how tight the house was before we got there and how tight it was afterwards. We fill out the ASHRAE calculator. If you have a chance to, I know that Red Calc Online is a great place, a great resource to use for calculating what kind of compliance is required. In terms of number of occupants, the volume of air-conditioned space in the home, what mechanical ventilation you do have in the home. Another condition to keep in mind is the temperature of a home. Molds love a warm house, a toasty warm place. Molds germinate and grow best in warm temperatures. 77 to 86 degrees is primo conditions. Some molds can grow below 50 degrees, but they will grow slower. Hence, we've got the concern with those dead air spaces in warmer homes, closets, behind closed doors, bathrooms where temperatures increase and there is a constant moisture source. Number 6, oxygen. Molds require oxygen, but not light. Ooh. There's a lot of spaces that are dark in homes that have loads of oxygen. Again, we're talking closets, we're talking bedrooms, we're talking bathrooms without windows. There's lots of places behind couches that are pushed up against walls. Moving on to number 7, a condition for mold growth is time. Molds grow fast. It does not take long for things to get moving. Some fungi can germinate in a period as short as 4 to 12 hours. That's overnight or less. That's an afternoon. Mold spores are like seeds. Once they're released, they're carried by air or water into new locations throughout the home potentially. We don't want to provide a doomsday scenario here, but we do have to be aware that these things can happen quickly. If not dealt with, mold can spread in as little as 24 to 48 hours. Number 8, our 8th condition, improper weatherization work. And here is where it goes from basic knowledge of mold and moisture to the actual work that we do. The work, again, we are trying to accomplish is an energy efficient home. We do not want to, during the course of that, however, leave these homes in a condition where mold is apt to grow more. So some examples of improper weatherization work. Improper blower door diagnostics. Does your crew or contractor know what they are doing when they are running the blower door? Are they setting things up properly? Is a window cracked here and we're not getting a record of it on our blower door diagnostics? What about over tightening the house? Getting the house too tight without accommodating for that with our ventilation strategy. What about improper ventilation levels? Do we know how to test the fans to make sure that in the end, the fans that are running are doing what we are asking them to do, following ASHRAE compliance? What about improper installation? We can't just throw a fan in the ceiling and hope that it does the trick. We have specifications for that fan to be vented all the way through the attic and outside, or through the wall and outside. There are specifications for materials to be used, for fasteners to be used. These things are important. The failure to apply energy-related health and safety measures. If we just choose to bypass certain things that are required through our specifications, could cause mold and moisture buildup in the home. If we are working in a crawl space and a vapor barrier is not installed, that could be an issue. Okay, our last condition that we're going to talk about is home occupant awareness. Remember, we are leaving these homes to these clients afterwards, to the homeowner. It is their job after we are done to maintain this home. So if we don't provide good enough education, they are going to assume, potentially, that the work we have done is perfect and they don't have anything to worry about anymore. But that's just simply not true. Houses move and change and alter with time. And therefore, it is our job to provide occupant awareness. We need to provide them with our mold assessment, our visual assessment. We need to provide them with education to solving problems and preventing future issues. We give them an EPA booklet or a link to the EPA, a brief guide to mold and moisture, which provides them with a lot of context, a lot of interesting information, a lot of education, a lot of supplies, and deeper understanding to both their home and how mold and moisture affect it. Questions again for discussion. Feel free to pause after I read the question and answer by yourself, and then we'll come back after a brief break, or just listen straight through and we'll talk through some of the answers afterwards. So in this case, for this section, how are each of these factors that influence the growth and spread of mold, the 9 that we talked about, how are those related to weatherization work? Well, remember we have 9. So mold spores, organic materials, moisture, building tightness, temperature, oxygen range, time, improper weatherization assessments, and occupant knowledge. These are 9 different things that as we pay attention to as assessors, as crew, as contractors, as we go out to do this weatherization work, if we understand how mold spores travel, what they need to eat, what conditions are conducive to their growth, the work that we do and how it affects the home, all of those things go into the combined efforts of our weatherization programs to make a house not only more energy efficient, but also more safe and durable for the client in the long run. Okay, let's move on. Mold testing. Now, mold testing, according to Commerce Policy 9.6, mold testing is not an allowable weatherization or weatherization plus health cost. No mold testing. Now, weatherization plus health allows us to do some mold remediation, but it does have limitations. Please remember the costs associated with it. Let's move on to speaking a little bit about building assessments and the requirements thereof. So as part of the energy audit, a mold assessment should be done to assure existing mold conditions are noted. We have a client health and safety observed conditions document that we need to fill out. We also want to assure that existing building envelope conditions don't contribute to mold growth when weatherization measures are applied. Anything that has to do with moisture intrusion, water intrusion from the outside. A mold assessment means it's just a visual building survey related to weatherization. A weatherization assessment, again, does not include testing. When we conduct an energy-related mold assessment using the Commerce checklist, or equivalent, we conduct an energy-related mold assessment using that checklist, the pollution source survey, or the health and safety conditions document as a part of our normal weatherization audit. It provides not only context for the work that we do, but also provides a basis for education for the client themselves. If we start dabbling in non-energy related mold assessments, those are beyond the scope of weatherization. They're also not an allowable cost, and it puts us in the place of, quote, mold expert, and we, again, don't want to be in that place. We put ourselves in the realm of mold expert, and our liability goes through the roof. Make sure, again, to reiterate that point, that we are protecting ourselves as auditors, as inspectors, as crew, as contractor. We want to document the current condition. We want to use the existing checklist that we have. We want to take photos or video, and we also want to make sure that we record this in the client file. We want to disclose to the client during the educational portion what we know and what we don't know. We do not want to make claims that we are not qualified to make. We want to provide them with A Brief Guide to Mold and Moisture, the EPA mold publication. During the client disclosure portion of things, we want to make sure that we reiterate that we're not experts, that we just observed things. We did not do any test, and we want to make sure that they sign the documents that we have that communicate these things to them. Sometimes we need to indicate that there are conditions that are beyond the abilities of the weatherization program. For example, weatherization services may need to be delayed until the existing mold problem can be referred to another agency for funding of remedial action. We need to provide context for things if we have to pass on the project for the time being. We also want to provide mold education, and a lot of that comes through documenting existing conditions. During the client disclosure, we want to provide some education. This education may have to do with cleaning and disinfecting surfaces, lowering humidity levels, exhausting the dryer to outside. Remember our 5 pints of water that comes out of an improperly exhausting dryer. Fixing plumbing leaks, using a range hood to exhaust moisture. Increasing air circulation simply by opening windows, opening closet doors, moving furniture away from walls. During that building assessment, it's important that we use our senses to find issues. Not only do we follow our eyes, but we also follow our nose. You can start to track down where those smells are coming from and follow our nose and our eyes. If you can see it or smell it, more than likely mold is present. It's one of the joys of being an assessor, being an inspector, working in this business, is to play the detective for a home. During your building assessment, we want to provide a general examination of the building. We want to take a look at the structure. We want to take a look at any sort of maintenance activities that are going on around the building itself, occupancy patterns. We want to visually look for mold and water staining. We know what it looks like. We want to look for evidence of standing water, crawl spaces outside along the foundations, looking for evidence of condensation, windows, big heavy drapes and moisture behind on all the windows. We want to check for basement and crawl space, attic for proper ventilation and exhaust. Are the fans doing what they're supposed to do? Are they running to where they are supposed to run? We also want to look at the occupied space, going inside. What are we going to see inside the home? What do we need to document during our building assessment? We want to be taking a look at plumbing leaks, water staining on walls, ceilings, around windows, musty odors, surface condensation, mold on carpeting. Heaven help us. I remember one quick story about a client who had a water heater that long after we finished work there, it sprung a small leak. And that leak wasn't detected for several months until 15 feet away, the floor had swollen with the water, so much so that she couldn't get a door open. When I went out to visit, there was not a pinhole leak anymore. It was a hot water leak that was shooting out the water heater, and that whole back bathroom had become so saturated with water that there were mushrooms growing from the ground, and everything was covered in green. And again, 15 feet away, a door did not even open because of how much water had soaked into different things. Mold on carpeting, humidifiers, window air conditioners, lack of bathroom or kitchen exhaust, clothes dryers not vented to outside. Is the firewood stored inside? Is it conditioning inside the home, thus letting off moisture into the house? How about wet clothes? Is the family drying clothes inside the house on drying racks? What about the outdoor space? Soil grade or drainage toward the foundation? What about standing water adjacent to that foundation? Wall or roof damage allowing water intrusion, missing or blocked rain gutters, downspout extensions. Are the downspouts draining right up against the foundation wall? Firewood stacked adjacent to the house, that's going to trap that moisture between the firewood and the actual wall of the home. How about excessive shrubbery around the foundation? We also want to make sure that we get our eyes on the HVAC system. How's the furnace? How's the heating in the home? Are the air intakes, is there stuff clogging those air intakes versus being very clean? How are the filters looking? I wish I could show you all the thousands of pictures I've taken of filters that are just caked with dust, caked with dirt, dog hair on the top of them. Are the filters dirty, damp, or are they a poor type? How about the heat exchangers? Are they dirty? Do they have damp coils? The condensate pans, are they doing what they're supposed to? Drainage, that is there stagnant water around the heating system itself? What about the ductwork? We all have horror stories of what's in that ductwork. Any number of moisture, rodents, dirty grossness in that space. Moisture collecting on a surface that has an organic material is just prone for mold growth. Questions for discussion. 1. What's involved with an energy-related mold assessment? A visual assessment. Sniff around, smell it out, look at all the systems, all the surfaces, and all the areas of a home. Number 2, let's review the key steps of client disclosure. Document conditions, communicate with the client, provide education. Let's add a couple. Don't make yourself out to be an expert. Make sure that they sign off on any document about the existing conditions. Number 3, when assessing a home for energy-related molds, let's talk about 4 common areas of the home where mold problems may exist. How about the general building envelope? Common areas, the structure, the occupancy. The standing water may be outside. Mold. Let's talk about outside the house or the site. These are some common areas we might find mold problems outside on the site. Issues could be drainage, roof damage, gutters. Let's talk about the occupied space. Stains, odors, poorly installed, poorly functioning air conditioning units, dryer ventilation, bathroom, kitchen ventilation. Problems with HVAC systems. Are they clean? Is there holes? Is the ductwork dirty? Is everything damp? What's collecting inside? Now let's talk a little bit about preventing mold buildup. I love Gary Larson. He's the comic artist here. This comic is used to illustrate the fact that weatherization is not rocket science, but it does take some training to put the parts together. We always want to refer back to the Washington State Weatherization Standards for a basic standard for the work that we do. Again, the intention through weatherization is to do what we do well. We know building science, we know how building science works, and we can use our knowledge to prevent the growth of mold. During the course of a weatherization job, crew leads, auditors, inspectors all need to have the prevention of mold in their minds. A proper line of thinking would be this: to assess the project. Take a look at everything that is involved. What are we going to be doing here? We want to identify any potential issues. Do we have areas where mold buildup is possible? We also want to determine any sources. Is the source of moisture coming from outside? Is it inside? Is it due to the occupancy of the home? Is it due to the conditions of the home? Is it due to the conditions around the outside of the home? We also want to make sure that we communicate. We communicate, one, with our supervisors. We want to communicate with our crew or contractor, and we want to communicate with the client so that we are all on the same page for the work to be done. And then we set the scope of work to be completed with health and safety and prevention of mold in mind. Specifically, in regards to ventilation moisture control, there are some things that we need to keep aware of. Bathrooms and kitchens and utility areas should be vented to the outside, never to attic or crawl spaces. This would include bath fans, kitchen fans, dryer ventilation, utility ventilation. We have seen those spaces where fans are blowing damp air into a closed space and what they can do to the structure. Now let's keep in mind that for the most part, exhaust ventilation rarely discharges the rated CFM. Also, exhaust fan timers and fans themselves have come a long way in the last few years. Let's talk about timers, proper timers, relative humidity sensors, humidistats. These are fantastic additions to the resources that we have, where once it was just an on-off switch. For our exhaust ventilation, we do have some rules. Again, I'll refer you back to the Washington State Department of Commerce specifications. We also have the standard work specifications in the field guide that provide context for how we install exhaust ventilation. It needs to be sized correctly. It needs to be exhausted to outside, never into the attic. We want to go the shortest vertical distance to outside or direct vent through a wall. We need to control bathroom exhaust with a timer or a humidistat. We also want to use the materials to the specifications. The venting system itself, is it rigid? Is it flex? What are the rules surrounding attachments? How about elbows, termination caps? Again, we have specifications for these things so that we can follow the rules and so that we can make sure that that exhaust ventilation is doing everything that it possibly can. Clothes dryers. We want to prevent mold through proper ventilation of clothes dryers. Once again, I'm going to refer you to my little wall of water right here. An improperly vented clothes dryer is giving off a ton of moisture to a home. It's also providing all the organic material that mold needs to really grow. Lint. The exhaust air, there's pounds of moisture in it. Temperature, typically the temperature coming out of a clothes dryer is somewhere between 70 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have all the necessary ingredients for mold to grow. Our dryer vent rules, we want to make sure that we vent it to outside. With mobile homes, it cannot just be vented down into the crawl space. It has to be vented down and all the way out the skirting. We never vent into crawl spaces. It's similar with exhaust ventilation. Any exhaust ventilation does not go into a confined space. It goes all the way outside. We want to exhaust it outside to program specs. If elbows are needed, we should limit them as much as possible. The less we can slow air down before it goes outside, the less chance moisture will have to build up. In preventing mold, we also air seal. Air sealing can keep humid air and moisture from entering the home, and over-tightening can cause elevated relative humidity. Once we tighten up a home, we run the issue of trapping moisture in the home without proper ventilation. Again, that's when we use our blower door to monitor air tightness within a home. This also brings up a good point that we can use some of the ASHRAE calculators that we have at our service. RedCalc Online is a good option to use. Your agency may have an in-house ASHRAE calculator that takes into consideration building infiltration credits, occupants, existing ventilation. When preventing mold, we also want to look at controlling moisture. In this case, let's talk about foundation drainage. Where does foundation moisture come from? An inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof produces roughly 623 gallons of water. That's an insane amount of water, and if we are not controlling where that moisture is running off the roof, then we are going to have issues at the foundation line. We could also have homes where there is a high water table around it. Plants around the foundation. We're watering our plants, those plants are trapping moisture in the ground, those roots are butting up against the foundation system. We could have an issue with drainage due to those plants. Also, leaking water spigots, the ones that everybody has at their houses and has fully intended on fixing for years and years and years, but that moisture is dripping constantly and is trying to work its way back into the house. Our weatherization program does have an option, but it is specifically through our funding sources, right? So we can install a dehumidifier, but that is not a regular weatherization measure. We're talking weatherization plus health. Crawl space moisture control is also important, not just at the foundation, but also within the crawl space. We need cross ventilation in a crawl space. We fully trap off our crawl space and it's a damp space. We are just asking for mold problems. When we're talking about cross ventilation, we should at least have 4 vents. 4 vents, 1 square foot of net-free area ventilation per 150 square feet of floor space. And again, that plays into what we are exhausting into that space. If we are hoping for proper ventilation just within the crawl space itself, it's also important for us to know what is venting into that area. No mechanical ventilation into that space like a clothes dryer. Lastly, moisture control in a crawl space could have to do with just a basic vapor barrier going down. Now, we do have some specifications regarding that as well. We want it to be 6 mil plastic. We also want it to be black. No clear plastic going on. We do not want to encourage any sort of growth underneath that plastic. Let's jump into the attic. Preventing mold in an attic. We're talking again about attic ventilation. Is there high ventilation? Is there low ventilation? We need both of them. We need cross ventilation to circulate air around that space. Again, we're talking 1 square foot of net-free area for every 150 square feet of attic area. A reminder, we never exhaust anything just straight into an attic space. This just attic venting can prevent ice damming in cold climates. Let's talk about air purifiers, air cleaners. If, through weatherization plus health, you choose this route, don't forget to provide education. We need to make sure that everyone knows, not only the auditor, but also the client, mold spores are very tiny. They stay airborne for days. Filters, purifiers, remove only some spores and don't remove some proteins or some volatile organic compounds. Depending on the unit that you install, whether through Plus Health or not everything can or could be removed. And one thing that we absolutely want to make sure that when we see it, smell it, notice it, that ozone units are not used in occupied space. They are noted as a potential health and safety issue. Ozone can kind of smell like chlorine, or sometimes that smell that you can find just after it has rained. It's nasty on the lungs, cause a whole realm of issues. Never install them. Educate if you find them. Weatherization Plus Health does allow the purchase and installation of an air purifier, but we've just gone over the reasons why it is important that we cover what they can and can't do in the end. We also need to talk about structural drying. Within the structure, how can we dry out these places that have potentially been saturated with moisture for so long? We need to open enclosed areas like closets and cabinets. Leave those things open. Try and get some circulation in there. Get the ambient temperature between 68 and 72. That's kind of prime condition for that relative humidity of what we want, that mix between hot and cool. We want to circulate air across damp surfaces using fans that we may install, maybe potentially additional fans to move the air around the house. We want to make sure that we are exhausting moist air to outside, that our fans are working the way that they're supposed to. Drying may take a while. A particularly damp house, it's not a matter of 1 hour and everything is better. We cannot say that. Again, we are not the expert. Drying may take a while to get a house back down to a good humidity level. Can we or do we have clients with high relative humidity? Yeah. Do we have something in place to make sure that they follow this process? Maybe something worth considering. What is our agency's policy on asking and requiring and documenting steps to have clients reduce humidity in the home? What is your agency's requirements for this. Okay, some questions for discussion. 1. How does indoor relative humidity affect mold growth? Well, there's more moisture in the air. It can settle on surfaces. There's condensation. There's space in the air for more moisture to collect and therefore grow mold. 2. Discuss some cases in which it might be useful to find out the indoor relative humidity. What about with clients with respiratory issues? Dampness noted in the home. Noted condensation on the windows. It might be helpful to find out that relative humidity inside the house. 3. Where should kitchen and bath fans be vented? Outside. Through the skirting if it's a dryer and there's a crawl space underneath. 4. How much crawl space and attic ventilation is generally suggested? Both are the same. 1 square foot of net-free area per 150 square feet of space area, attic or crawl space. 5. Does your state weatherization guidelines vary from these recommendations? Are there reasons why this may be true? Spend some time, check your guidelines. What does it have to do with? Does it have to do with the area of the state that it differs? Is it the wet side of the state or the dry side of the state? What is the typical humidity outside during summertime, during wintertime? What type of snow load or moisture do you end up having in your area? Do the weatherization guidelines vary from the typical recommendations due to where you are? These are things you should know. Let's talk for a minute about mold treatment. What does the Weatherization Assistance Program allow in regards to mold treatment? DOE funds may be used to correct energy-related conditions to allow for effective weatherization work and or to assure immediate health of workers and clients. Regular weatherization jobs are limited in their interactions with mold. The focus needs to be energy-related. The treatment of energy-related conditions refers to stabilizing an energy-related situation so effective weatherization can be done. In some energy-related situations, cleanup may also be necessary in order to effectively weatherize a home. So what does this refer to is the question here. How should we proceed? In Washington State, the Weatherization Assistance Program allows for moisture control via a fan. Policy 9.2.1, Weatherization Plus Health, allows for mold and moisture reduction. This has to do with dryer work, vapor barrier in the home, limited repairs for plumbing leaks, limited roof repairs, retaining existing ventilation in attic and crawl spaces via baffling, say strip vents, etc. Policy 9.6, biologicals including mold and moisture. We will come back to this policy in just a moment. Let's talk about Weatherization Plus Health mold and moisture reduction. Some of the options within our Plus Health funding allow for more flexibility, and that includes these following items: dehumidifiers, dehumidistats, leak repair, sump pump, drainage systems, mold abatement within funding limits. Please remember that mold remediation is within limits. Commerce has limits. These limits are a total for all Weatherization Plus Health measures installed. Right now, $8,000 for a medically documented home and $4,000 for a self-attestation of a respiratory concern or issue. For mold remediation, Commerce Policy 9.6, we'll just read this screen. It provides a lot of good definitions here. Remediation or repair of conditions leading to or promoting biologicals, chemicals, pollutants, and unsanitary conditions, including mold and moisture-related problems, is allowed within the guidelines as detailed in this section. Moisture-related problems, limited water damage repairs that can be addressed by weatherization workers in correction of moisture and mold, creating conditions are allowed when necessary in order to weatherize the home and ensure long-term stability and durability of the measures. So this allows us to repair some of those moisture-related concerns so that weatherization may still happen. In conclusion, many issues to attend to on our weatherization jobs. There are things that we have to pay attention to, that we have to respond to, that we have to plan well ahead for. The hope of this presentation was to educate you and provide some of the necessary resources to allow each weatherization job to properly notice and address mold and moisture problems. Some of the things that we have to identify and keep in mind as we go out to an assessment or an inspection is an investigation, communication to those around us, budgeting and planning and coordinating for this work, what repairs are to be done and how they are to be done, and remediation of any issues within the home, the structure, or the surrounding areas. I hope this has been helpful. Please don't hesitate to reach out to the Building Performance Center or myself in specific. Again, my name is Jake Knuckles. Our contact information is on this last page. We hope you have appreciated this online educational presentation about mold and moisture. Thank you for your time.